Meeting to order. This is the full committee of the Ways and Means, and we've got several items on the agenda. Some are shorter than others, but most important, we have one of our presenters has to get to a daddy-daughter dance, so we are going to hear from Kevin Tanner first. Representative Tanner.
Chairman, I'm bringing before you today substitute House Bill 63 LC 344431S, House Bill 63. In essence, what this attempts to do is take an existing tax credit that's currently in Georgia law that no one's utilizing, absolutely no one's utilizing, because the low amount and because it's very complicated to take advantage of. So in essence, what this bill would do is, if an employer has an employee that is working for him that does not have a GED or high school diploma, and the employer wants to assist that employee in obtaining that by paying for the test, paying the cost to go take the GED test, or by paying the employee hourly rate or salary or whatever the case might be on the clock to go take GED classes at an adult learning center, or if the employer wants to set up an approved adult learning center within the business and pay the employee's time for them to go, and then pay for the GED test, and the employee passes the test, they would get some tax credit based on this legislation in front of you. The current legislation, the current law has an aggregate of $2 million. That's not changed in this legislation, and I think that's probably one of the reasons that I was able to work with Chairman England and get him to be my #1 co-sponsor, because there's no additional liability for the state in this legislation before you. This is something that's been worked on for the past several months, probably about 8 months actually, with the Department of Technical Education, the adult learning folks, and also the Department of Revenue. I'll go very quickly through the elements of the bill, Mr. Chairman, and be glad to answer any questions. There's a few definitions on the first page, but the meat of it starts around 25. There has to be no cost to the employee, so the employer cannot require reimbursement. The employer cannot require that the employee work in lieu of this training. That has to be completely free to the employee. Of course, it defines what test we're talking about, which is GED test. It also requires that the employee would have had to have been employed by that employer for at least 16 consecutive weeks, and they have to work at least 24 hours a week to be eligible. This also, like I said before, it can be an on-site training program within the business if the business is large enough, but that has to be approved by TSC, by the Technical College System of Georgia. They have to approve these sites, or they could send them out to an adult learning center to receive the training. And then going into the amounts of the tax credit can be obtained two ways. Number one, if the employer just pays for the cost of the test, and we'll talk about this in a minute because it's down in the bill, but I think it's important for me to tell you that this process would work by the employer getting pre-approved for the tax credit. So the Department of Revenue will set up a process where an employer who wants to take advantage of this would go online, fill out the information. If the money's available, they'd be pre-approved. They then would start the program. They have to notify them within 45 days if the money's available. If it is, then they're approved to get into the program. If they pay the cost to go take the GED test and the employee passes, then the technical school will send a certificate to the employer, and that employer would include that with their income tax return as proof that they completed that test. If the employer agrees to pay the cost of the employee to take training classes for at least 40 hours and then pays the cost to take the test and they pass, then the employer could get up to a $1,200 tax credit in option 2 on line 44. Again, this is a pre-approval process, has to be done within 45 days by the Department of Revenue. Those are numbers the Department of Revenue have agreed to. I've worked with them on this issue, and toward the end of the bill, around line 62 through 79, it talks about that the technical school, adult education, and the Revenue Department will work together to create the rules for this process. and that this will be an income on the income tax return. There'll be a certificate issued by the Technical College System of Georgia. The idea here is the Revenue Department's involvement is on the front end. Once the student's approved and in the program, then the technical school will handle the data and the backup and the certification for this program, so it'll be a very user-friendly process. Lines 80, you see that the aggregate amount is $2 million. One of the things that a couple of things we added in, the reason for the substitute, is no single employer would be eligible to receive more than $100,000 of this. It was asked at subcommittee, are there employers in the state who would have that many employees? Because I think somebody did the math and that was 80 some odd employees. I can tell you that we do have employers that we've been in conversations with that have hundreds of employees in the state that work for them that do not have a GED that would be interested in taking advantage of this program. But we did not want one or two companies coming in and taking up all the tax credit money. In addition to that, the Revenue Department will do a report back to the General Assembly annually so we can see if this program's working, does it need to be tweaked. And it also sunsets after 4 years. I think it's a desire of this committee to sunset tax credits so that you can relook at those in the future. If it's working, then I would anticipate the General Assembly would want to continue that. If it's not, then you make changes or repeal it. Mr. Chairman, that's in essence the bill. There was a question asked at last committee relating to the failure rate of testing. It's around 40% of the people who take the GED test fail the test, and around 50% of the people who take the GED test self-report that they've taken some type of training class prior to taking the test. I'll also tell you that we felt like that there needed to be some incentive for the employers to take advantage of this because they are taking a risk, because there's absolutely no guarantee their employee will pass. There's no guarantee they'll pass in that tax year. If they don't, they lose the credit. So there is a risk. I also want to mention to you that in conversations with the area that I'm in, the Lanier Technical College area, we have a great GED program, adult learning centers in Hall County, Dawson, throughout the region for Forsyth County. And in talking with Brenda Thomas, who heads that program, she said word has gotten out already about this legislation, and she's received numerous calls from companies in that area looking forward to taking advantage of it. And I personally have met with several large companies that have employment bases all across the state that are interested in taking advantage of this credit if it is passed by this General Assembly and signed by the governor. Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Representative Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Tanner, the goal of this is to help more of our citizens get the GED so they can get better work opportunities. Is that a simple goal? Is that right?
That's correct.
And so, for instance, in the hospitality industry, which is the largest industry in our state, employs more people than any other industry. Most of those positions are $10 to $12 an hour jobs, probably. An employer is going to take the risk, as you just stated, for a $1,200 credit that may potentially cost them $500 or $600, but may cost them more than that if the employee were to fail the GED. So, I mean, it's while there's a risk for the employer, but it benefits the employee in the long term, potentially give them better job opportunities. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. It's a win-win for the employee, and that's who we're trying to look out for and incentivize the employer to get involved in that process.
Right. I think it's a darn good bill, good thing for our state, too. Thank you for bringing this forward.
All right, Representative Knight.
I'm sorry.
Okay, Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Carson, I believe that this bill is well-intentioned, and I think it's a great idea for us to provide more opportunities to educate the workforce. I do have a couple of concerns, but also just as a point of clarification, I don't know anybody who runs a business, who's ever invested in a business, who didn't think about risk. That's sort of the nature of being a capitalist, is you're not guaranteed any return on investment, you're not guaranteed anything, but that's the nature of business, is to have some risk involved. Do you know of any other tax credit that we provide in the state that we pay the person getting the credit more than they actually paid out for the credit that they're getting in return?
I couldn't answer that, to be honest with you. I'm not familiar with every tax credit in the state.
Well, my concern is that if we're offering a $1,200 tax credit for an expense that is probably anywhere from $320 to $480, that seems a bit unbalanced. I understand your position on risk, but that's, again, the nature of business is to have some risk. It seems to me an overly generous tax credit to give an employer a $1,200 tax credit when they've only expended $480. And if you look at the example of a company that might have as many as 83 employees, and to get that $100,000 tax credit, if their employee is making $12 an hour, that employer would have spent less than $40,000 to get $100,000 in tax credits.
Well, number one, I don't think it'll be as low as $400 because if you take FICA and Social Security and all the other things, and I believe Vice Chairman Peake testified or spoke last time that even in his restaurant, the cooks now are making more than $12 an hour, and a lot of those people are the ones that we're trying to attract to take advantage of this program. So I think it's going to cost the employer more than what you stated. But number two, there is a risk, and employers do take risk, but they take risk to have a return on their investment in business. This is asking them to assist the employee. May or may not have any assistance to them or give the employer any assistance at all, but they're helping another person, another human being, be able to have a hand up. And so I believe to get them engaged, because there's been a tax credit on the books, it's not got them interested. And in meeting with all the employers that I've talked to, there has to be an incentive. It has to be attractive enough for them to get involved. I'm a businessman, and I look at return on investment. And as a state, I think we have to invest our money and our resources with a ROI. And I think that if you'll look at the amount of money that someone who earns a GED will earn in their lifetime compared to someone who doesn't have a GED or high school diploma, a $1,200 cost to be able to make that happen is a very low cost for our state. And I think it's a wise investment for our state. And my attempt is to help those individuals in our state who have not been as fortunate as some of us have to be able to grow up in homes and to receive a good education. And it's difficult, and I know a lot of these people, and I work with a lot of them in this adult learning environment where I've volunteered many years, and I can tell you there's a lot of less fortunate folks who are working full-time jobs in one of Cheddar's restaurants, who work a shift, have children to raise in schools, then they're going home at night, and they don't have time to go to an adult learning center. And if we can incentivize a business by giving them a tax credit incentive to help those people, then we're helping that individual, and that's who I'm looking after. And I think we're also moving the state forward in a very positive way. So I stand by the calculations.
Well, I'm not. I don't believe that you're. I believe you're miscalculating what I'm talking about. I don't disagree that people who don't have GEDs ought to be given an opportunity to earn those GEDs. I don't believe that we shouldn't reimburse employers for what they spend. I think it's not the state's role to give an employer a credit that is over and above what they've expended. I just don't think that's the role of the state to do that. So I think your bill is well intentioned, but I think the amount of the credit is excessive.
And I respect that. I just don't believe that you can put an exact number on the credit because of the failure rate, because of the risk factor. But again, I go back to simply saying the business community will not take advantage of it if it's not worth the risk. That's why we have the numbers here. I respect where you're coming from, but I just disagree.
Let me ask you a question. Wasn't it part of your presentation that 40% of the people who take the test passed? So you're basically looking at 2.5 applicants for every successful applicant?
It's a 40% failure rate.
40% failure
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it takes more than 2 people in order to get a successful applicant.
That's correct.
And you only get the credit if you're successful.
That's correct.
So you're investing in failure but only getting rewarded for success.
That's correct.
Okay. Representative Duncan? Who's 25? Okay, Representative Parsons.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative, I appreciate the bill. I'm going to support it, and I think that you know, what you said is right on target. I do have a couple of concerns, and of course, this is the place to, you know, to voice any concerns. One's not really a concern; it's a statement. But you know, they have been given the opportunity for an education. They have been given an opportunity through our public school system, public education, to get their education first of all. But the concern I have, you know, I'm wondering if we should be concerned. These industries you're talking about have hired these people, you know, without them needing a degree, a high school degree. And I'm just wondering, should we be concerned that those companies would use that process as an evaluation beyond the work that they do and their capabilities? I mean, would they use, if somebody doesn't pass, now do they have something that they could evaluate those people negatively that they didn't have before? I mean, is that a valid concern, do you think?
I respect that, and I understand the question, but I don't think so based on the conversations I've had with these companies, and I'll explain that. These companies, many of these companies, have a wide variety of positions, and a lot of them don't require a high school diploma or a GED, but they also have upper momentum, and the employees that they want to invest in are those employees that have worked for them, and that's one of the reasons we put those. It's got to work at least 16 weeks, so it's not someone they just hire to be able to take advantage of the credit who's about to get their GED. So they've invested already in that employee. But also there's momentum, upward momentum within that company. So if they get their GED and they do well, if they fail, I don't think I can't speak for every company. Is that a risk? Of course it would be a possibility. But I think the reward's much greater. And I also think that there's cases, and I heard employers say in conversations, well, you know, the employee may go somewhere else if they get their GED. And that's true, too. So the employee may not stay with that company. But I can tell you, I spoke at a GED graduation, about 800 graduates, and I got to be the keynote speaker in Hall County. And it's amazing at the excitement those individuals have when they get that GED. And people who just dropped out of high school a few years ago to people who were in their 60s. And these people don't stop. They continue their education through our technical schools and through our colleges. So I think it's a win-win. And I also think it's very difficult for someone to go in, if they've been out of school a decent amount of time and pass the GED without being prepared. And I think it's difficult for this sector of the population to be able to get that without some help. And this is a way that we can incentivize the private sector to help with that.
Good explanation. Thank you. Appreciate
it. Any other questions? Do I hear a motion?
Move to do pass.
All right, there's a motion and a second to pass. Any discussion from the committee? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried, and you need to check with rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Duncan, I believe you asked for, are you going to a daddy-daughter dance?
I'm going to judiciary.
You'd rather go to a daddy-daughter dance.
You're not going there too quickly.
All right, tell us about 227.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is House Bill 227. We only strike two words. The most complicated part of this bill is the pronunciation of one of those words for me. The federal definition for Energy Star qualified products does not include programmable thermostats, but in our Georgia code it does. And so we moved to strike the words programmable thermostat. And really what it's created is some confusion in the retail sector as to which retailers collect that tax or give that credit.
Okay. All right, questions for the author? Hearing none, do I hear a motion? There's a motion to pass. Is there a second? Any discussion from the committee? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? You're free to go to judiciary.
Thank you.
Representative Carson, I think you had next dibs. You can actually present from there. Any member of the committee can present from where they're sitting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is House Bill 20. I pre-filed late last year. This is identical to House Bill 683, which we passed unanimously out of this committee last year, and it passed the House floor by over 162 votes. All this really does is this bill would allow Georgia entities, this is talking about low-income housing tax credits, and I think there is there not a fiscal note attached
There
to
is.
it? Okay. What this says, and it's, from what I understand, is the fiscal note has no impact, and it was the same as last year. What this does in regard to low-income housing tax credits, the credits, as you know, are developed under partnership entities, limited partnerships, and so forth. What this bill would do would allow Georgia entities, the Georgia low-income housing tax credit partnerships, to allocate the Georgia low-income housing tax credits within them to the owners of those partnerships, regardless of the federal income tax treatment of these entities and the allocations. There's been some concern and some case law recently in regard to when you have a very small partnership interest, whether or not that, according to the IRS, whether or not that partnership was valid, and therefore whether or not the tax credits are valid. What we're doing here is just saying that the validity of the tax credits for the Georgia state tax credits are dependent upon Georgia definition of whether or not these partnerships are valid, not federal definition of whether or not they're valid. And that's all the bill really does.
All right, I have two questions. Number one, what you're doing, as I understand it, is that you are clarifying what Georgia law says so that the federal government in interpreting this will defer to Georgia law. Is that correct? I mean, did they make a different interpretation?
Can you explain that question again?
If, for instance, under Georgia law, I am a valid 5% partner, does that then mean that the federal government has to recognize that, or do they treat me different than Georgia law does?
Well, the federal would stand on, it's the federal interpretation and determination of the partnership for the federal tax credits.
Okay.
What we're saying here is that the state tax credits are dependent upon the state interpretation of that partnership.
Okay. All right. Second question. This went through committee last year, went and passed the House,
Yes.
and got stuck in the Senate towards
Yes.
the end of the session.
That's right.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the committee? 17, Representative Houston.
Can these tax credits be sold?
Yes, I believe they can, yes. And what this does, if I may, Mr. Chairman, what this does is provide clarity in regard to the allocation of the tax credits. And once you have a surety to the value that they won't be devalued by a pronouncement that the partnership is not valid, these credits become more valid, more marketable, and so forth. And eventually you're going to get a little more, potentially a little bit more value for these credits and more money eventually in the low-income housing projects once you have more clarity in regard to that. Yes, regardless of federal interpretation, these credits are valid per state interpretation.
Any other questions? Any other questions from any members of the committee? What's the pleasure of the committee? There's a motion to pass. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passed on to rules.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Representative Harrell, I think we'll get back on the list. Talk to us about 49. You're on.
I'm on. Okay. House Bill 49 is LC 344275. As Representative Carson, this is also identical bill that passed this committee last year dealing with electronic property tax billing. It passed the House floor 160-0, passed Senate Finance, and then was combined with a larger tax bill that ultimately did not come out of conference. To the best of my knowledge, there's no opposition from any party to this measure. And what it doesn't mandate anything. It's a permissive bill. It would allow a taxing jurisdiction to determine whether or not they wanted to offer electronic paperless billing. Once that determination was made, then it would be up to the taxpayer to determine to opt in or not. My county, a large county, Gwinnett, anticipates that this could save by voluntary participation upwards of $140,000 a year in billing costs. be glad to answer any questions.
Representative Peake.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Representative Harrell, I mean, the tax commissioners are supportive of this and want this, and is that correct?
Yes, sir. To the best of my knowledge, and no opposition.
Okay, good.
Any other questions? Do I hear a motion? Move to pass. All right, there's a motion to pass. There's a second. Any discussion from the committee? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And it passes on to rules. All right, Representative Harrell, while we've got you here, I want you to present for Dale Rutledge, who couldn't be here, House Bill 120 and House Bill 234, if you would, please, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 120 is LC 344382ER. And this was voted out of subcommittee on page 3 of the bill, line 7374, adds a sentence. And this would allow state properties to be included as a qualifying investment for SPLOST funds. So when our cities and counties often are partnering on various projects, and this would allow the state to join in that partnership as you can see, to capital outlay projects that are owned or operated and administered by the state would also be included as a qualifying property for investment.
All right. Any questions for the surrogate author? Representative Battles.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be honest with you, really didn't look at this very closely. Speak again about the, and I should ask this of the author, as the SPLOS is administered by the state. Explain that one more time.
For example, let's say
the state SPLOS.
No, sir.
Okay,
let's say
when you get old, your ears get kind of old with you. I'm sorry.
Too. And my eyes.
Explain that one more time, please.
Let's say a county and the state were going to do a joint project. For example, a state patrol substation, if you will, within a jurisdiction, then that would allow.
I understand. You got me.
All right, any other questions? Representative Abrams.
Chairman Harrell, but nothing in this would oblige the local government to dedicate the revenues. This simply gives it the option to encourage it, but doesn't give it the obligation.
Yes, ma'am. Exactly.
Representative Knight.
Yeah. Great question by Leader Abrams. Again, I want to make sure we understand the committee what was really behind this, or what's part of it is the fact that a lot of our local communities want to be a part of and put skin in the game, if you will, as far as projects. Again, the state patrol office, or maybe a college building or whatever. And this simply, I apologize to all the attorneys out there, but it probably takes a lot of the legal behind the scenes work away of trying to make sure that that is done correctly as ownership and all. So. Again, I'm good support.
I think the testimony at subcommittee was that this is currently happening, but in order to be legal, it's requiring intergovernmental agreements, and this just specifically authorizes this kind of expenditure without having to go through some of those machinations. Any other questions? Do I hear a motion? All right, we've got a motion and a second. Do pass. Any discussion from the committee? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Tell us about the second one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 234 is LC 344449, and this deals with the state's adoption of the streamlined sales tax program. And it's my understanding that that this adds language that says that if the Federal Reserve Bank happens to be closed that day, and this is on lines 15 and lines 19, that it brings us into compliance with federal law with regard to our streamlined sales tax program. We heard testimony that what days would the Federal Reserve Bank possibly be closed. There are very few and very infrequently. But, for example, something I learned that the bank may have been closed on Presidential Inauguration Day. So that was one example that was given in in the subcommittee. But this brings us in compliance with the federal laws for the programs we have in place.
Any questions? Do I hear a motion? We got a motion to pass. Is there a second? Motion second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It has passed the rules. Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Representative Battles is next, but I really think we need to save him for last. And so I'm going to ask Representative Kelly if he'll present 231. What is it? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here for House Bill 231 today, committee substitute. If I can find my copy here in all my papers and bills, I'll give you the LC number. Thank you. LC 344496S. This bill looks to do three things. It's a department bill from the Department of Revenue. First, it just makes clear that the commissioner will retain funds to make any payment of claims for unclaimed abandoned property for when those claims are made. Second, it says that when the commissioner is getting rid of these unclaimed abandoned properties, that out of the sale of that property, then they can pay certain expenses so that the sale will actually cover the cost instead of having that money come out of her budget. And then finally, it says that in Section 2, line 34, that keeping with the technology that is today, that instead of requiring the commissioner to post once a year a list of all the unclaimed property in a newspaper of general circulation, that they could simply post this online where most individuals are finding out about unclaimed property anyway.
Representative Pete.
Representative Kelly, could you, unclaimed property, I know that encompasses a lot of different things, but for instance, I know, again, the hospitality industry, there are unclaimed checks. You know, employees never, is your intent to go to include an unclaimed property even to that level, unclaimed checks that are not received by employees, or are you talking about just real estate property?
We're not changing any of the definitions of the unclaimed property as it sits today. This is just simply
There's no intent to do that.
No.
It's just any unclaimed property, though, would fall under this criteria, I guess.
If those checks qualify under current law, then they still qualify.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
He has not changed the definition.
Okay.
Representative Houston.
Question. Already you can go to the Department of Revenue's website and click on unclaimed property and look up and see if you have any unclaimed property. How is this going to be different from what we're already doing?
Well, right now, most people, I think, are doing exactly what you're saying they're doing, but the commissioner's still having to pay once a year to run the list of all the unclaimed property in just a newspaper of general circulation that they choose. So we're not requiring them to do that anymore.
It's not done by counties, because I know my campaign fund puts a list in my counties of all unclaimed properties.
Right. This is just a general. The line we're striking is right there on line 37. A newspaper of general circulation. Our law previously has never been any more specific than that.
All right. Next question. When you sell the unclaimed properties, for instance, there are a lot of abandoned safety deposit boxes, and sometimes we might have some jewelry or something in a safety deposit box. How do they advertise for the sale of these properties? Is that in here?
It's not in here, but we have some people from the department that may be able to elaborate a little bit more if you're interested.
I'm interested. I've been trying to find out when they, where they keep this property that's not,
Are you looking for anything specific?
Valentine's Day is coming up.
I just wonder what they've got. I'm always in for, yard sales and everything.
All right, the members from the department after the meeting, if y'all would meet with Representative Houston.
I didn't know if they have to advertise that they're having a sale or how it's done.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Rick Gardner with the Department of Revenue. For the jewelry and any of those goods, the baby teeth, all the things that we get that are in those safe deposit boxes, anything that's under $100 valuation, the law allows us to essentially dispose of as we see fit.
As what?
Anything that's valued below, I'm sorry, if I may.
Please.
Sorry, Representative. Rick Gardner, Legal Affairs and Tax Policy, Department of Revenue. I appreciate Representative Kelly helping us out with this bill. So the law allows us, if property has a value of less than $100, we have the option to dispose of it. Sometimes in those safe deposit boxes, people have things like literally old socks, baby teeth, all things of that nature, and we can just throw those away. Anything that is over and above that, jewelry, for instance, we essentially, once we have a kind of a critical mass, if you will, of property, then we'll have it valued, and we'll have an auction. And I believe that what we do with that is we just have to advertise that, hey, we're going to have this auction, and that's after that's been published already in the newspaper to let people know that the unclaimed property is available.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Stevens.
Representative Kelly, isn't it true that the meat of your bill, all that it does primarily is that allows the department to use the proceeds of the sale instead of an appropriated item in the budget for them to go in and get rid of this property faster?
You're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Any other questions? What's the pleasure of the committee? There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's passed 2 rules.
Thank you.
House Bill 215. Representative Jacobs.
If it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I've invited Interim CEO Lee May up to join me at the table here. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I bring before you today House Bill 215. CEO Lee May convened an operations task force to explore various issues affecting DeKalb County, and many of those we have encountered here in the General Assembly. In fact, it was aimed at dealing with exactly those sorts of issues. One of the issues that was within the scope of the operations task, and there were 17 members, including members of the business community, county commissioners, various legislators, including Senator Miller and I, were members of the task force, and it met weekly between the 2 legislative sessions, roughly from July through December. One of the tasks of the operations task force was to come forward with a recommendation as to how to fix the homestead option sales tax. A little historical context for you. Host is a creature that was created for DeKalb County, and in fact, DeKalb was the first to adopt it, and only one other county has at this point, Rockdale County. It is very telling that other counties are taking a look at adopting Host, but none of, specifically, I believe I've heard Cobb, Cherokee, and Gwinnett, but none of them want to use the existing Host statutes because of the structural deficiencies in the law as we have it right now. The problem from DeKalb's standpoint is that we are subject to those structural deficiencies, and they have become more pronounced over time, such that we need to come up with a solution to address them. Let me just break it down for you very quickly. Host, 80% of it is used for property tax reduction for homestead properties. And that 80% applies only to the county government portion of your property tax bill. So if you live in a municipality you do not get the same benefit on your property tax bill as residents in the unincorporated areas of the county. They get a greater benefit on their property tax bill, even though everyone is paying the same penny sales tax. The 20%, the remaining 20% of hosts is used for infrastructure funding, and it's divided up between the municipalities and the county according to a formula that was set out in the law a few years back by Senator Dan Weber when he was here. And the upshot of that formula is that it enables the municipalities to in essence, double dip in the formula to equalize the fact that their residents are not getting a benefit out of the 80%. So they in essence, get a benefit, an extra benefit out of the 20% to make up for the fact that they're not getting a benefit out of the 80. They get an extra benefit out of the 20% to make up for the fact that they're not getting a benefit out of the 80%. Of course, that 20% is restricted to infrastructure funding. Right now, a penny sales tax in DeKalb County generates about $100 million, so the 20% of hosts is about $20 million. Of that $20 million, the city of Dunwoody gets about $6.5 million. The city of Brookhaven gets about $6.5 million. Unincorporated DeKalb, which has the bulk of the population of the county at this point, gets $1.5 million. And I'm not here to address any issues with any new cities that might be created. I mean, that's not what this is about. But I do want to mention that if a new city were to be created in DeKalb County, we're at a point of diminishing returns on that 20% of hosts. So you would wedge it into that 20% of hosts. Dunwoody would lose an amount in the millions of dollars. Brookhaven would lose an amount in the millions of dollars. Unincorporated DeKalb would go from 1.5 million to some de minimis number. So it's a losing proposition for everybody. What the Operations Task Force recommendation is to allow, and I should say that, and I want to stress that because of the way the legislation is structured, this only applies to DeKalb County. It only applies to counties that presently have the host and charge a penny sales tax for the purposes of a metropolitan area system of public transportation, the MARTA penny. So DeKalb is the only county that meets those two criteria. It would enable DeKalb County to go to an eighth penny, and it would restructure host to a new, what we have termed in the bill, equalized homestead option sales tax, or e-host. The e-host would go 100% for property tax reduction. It would apply to residents in the unincorporated areas and residents in the municipalities in exactly the same way, so everybody will get exactly the same rollback on their property taxes regardless of where they live. That results in a significant benefit to citizens in cities because they're not getting that benefit on their property tax bill today. It also gives a slight benefit in the unincorporated areas as well because you're expanding the pie for property tax reduction. Then you would go to an eighth penny SPLOST that would be divvied up in DeKalb County by population. So the unincorporated area would get an amount commensurate with its share of the total population of DeKalb County, and each municipality would get a share commensurate with its share, unless the county and all of the cities and to the adoption of that SPLOST enter into an intergovernmental agreement for some other distribution of those funds. And I should also say that this is, in essence, a light switch effect. So you either adopt both the equalized host and the SPLOST by referendum, or you don't. If one of them goes away, then we go back to the old host, and we are leaving the old host on the books because Rockdale County participates in it under those terms. It also needs to be there in case this arrangement ever goes away. But as you can see from what I've described, it solves literally all of the problems with our current host. It will treat everybody the same in terms of the property tax benefit on the host side. It also treats everybody exactly the same in terms of infrastructure funding, and each of the municipalities should get some share that is larger than what they are getting now. And unincorporated DeKalb County, or the DeKalb County government for its unincorporated residents, certainly will get a much larger share given the fact that I have told you that a penny sales tax generates about $100 million in DeKalb County annually. I do want to give the interim CEO a couple of minutes to add whatever he'd like to add, and then I'll be happy to yield for questions.
Less than a couple minutes. I just want to thank Representative Jacobs for bringing this forward. It was brought forward through a collaborative effort in DeKalb County through this task force. It really meets a number of our needs. Number one, we are 400 miles behind in repaving roads in DeKalb County. That translates to about $125 million that we would have to pay to bring our roads in a state of good repair. So this does meet that need. It does narrow it where it only focuses on DeKalb County. In essence, because of kind of the visionary perspective that DeKalb has had over the decades in the implementation of the host as well as the creation of MARTA. And I would also add, with the investment in the only public safety, the safety net hospital, Grady Memorial Hospital, it does restrict our ability to really truly invest in our infrastructure. We believe this is an equitable solution to our needs in DeKalb County. It will allow us to move forward progressively with our capital infrastructure needs. And this simply, at the end of the day, this bill allows our citizens in DeKalb County to determine how they want to meet the needs of our infrastructure in DeKalb County. And we do support that. The Board of Commissioners voted just this week to support this through a resolution. And so I'm in support from the administration side of government. The Board of Commissioners are legislatively. The business community, the Chamber of Commerce has delved into this and are in agreement with this as well. And we think this is a great fix for our infrastructure needs in DeKalb County.
Okay, Leader Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Jacobs, would it not be accurate to say that this is a bipartisan, holistically approved for every member of the County of DeKalb, that there is almost no one who has expressed any concerns about this being an opportunity for the citizens of DeKalb to correct what we see as an imbalance in the division of funds?
That is absolutely correct, Representative Abrams. And I also want to say, I stopped at some point, but I am absolutely confident that I could have gotten the signatures of all 16 members of the DeKalb House delegation on this bill.
Chairman Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I think everyone's understanding of the problems that is going on in DeKalb, and I'm going to support this bill. But as we had talked about coming in, maybe as we go forward, if like Chairman Jacobs had said, and y'all have alluded to, if this host creature here is not, it's got its deficiencies, maybe in the future we come back and we maybe try to fix the underlying problem. I'm not saying we pass what we got here, because I know that there's an immediate need, but maybe in the future, and I'd be happy for one to help work on that too, because it seems like you're just, it's as an outlier that seems to be a problem, and but I'd be happy to work with that, with you in the future. And again, I support the current bill. I know you'll have immediate needs, but maybe we can address this going forward in the future.
I appreciate that, Chairman Knight.
Representative Parsons.
Thanks, Chairman. I think I understood you to say that this would provide for the county to have another penny e-host that 100% of would go for property tax reduction. Is that correct?
Well, it would replace our existing host.
Replace. So an e-host, I guess, would mean that 100% that goes property tax would be for the education or the school part of it. Is that where the E comes into it?
No, the E actually stands for equalized, and that means, yeah,
different kind
sorry,
of
I hope we don't end up confusing the voters with that. But the E stands for equalized, and it really means that for the first time ever, we're treating homestead property owners in the cities and in the unincorporated area exactly the same.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry.
Representative Houston.
I have no unclaimed property, by the way.
Okay, good. So this will not be an additional tax. You'll be taking off your host tax and e-host, is that right?
No, it does. It enables it enables an exception to the 7-cent cap for the SPLOST to be imposed, and that's the only way that we ultimately can solve the infrastructure needs in the county and also make all the municipal governments happy. Because remember, they're getting they're getting infrastructure funding that really is the lion's share of their infrastructure budgets out of that 20% of host. So we've got to give them some infrastructure funding, and that's what is going to come out of the SPLOST. I will note that exception though all includes areas, and again, this is one of the. I mean, this is just a legitimate challenge of paying the MARTA penny. All of the areas that have that exception to the 7-cent cap are MARTA jurisdictions. It would be Clayton County, the City of Atlanta for its sewer tax, and now DeKalb County.
Thank you.
Any other questions? What's the pleasure of the committee? Got a motion to pass and a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It's passed the rules. All right. Before we get to Representative Battles 202, I would like there's one that's not on the agenda, and I want to, what we're going to do is just make a presentation only, and that is 292. It is a kind of a cleanup bill, conformance of state law to federal law, and we do not have the fiscal note yet, so we will not vote on it, but I would like for Chairman Knight to present this, answer any questions that anybody may have, and then once we get the fiscal note, we will call a brief meeting to then act on it, but I would like to address all the issues today and just have the vote after we get the fiscal note. So Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for all of those folks who have come up and said they had phone calls from their CPAs trying to determine what some of the state tax deductions were, the Section 179, the accelerated depreciation. This is what this is about. As you know, Georgia piggybacks off of the federal code, and then we make adjustments to that to determine what Georgia is going to allow up under its tax code. And every year, it seems like it sunsets the accelerated depreciation, these items that we keep talking about every year at the federal level, and they wait until the last minute. In this case, I think it was in December, and it was the Tax Increase Prevention Act of 2014 to renew what the feds are going to do in regards to mainly the depreciation items, but several of the code sections. That has happened, and basically this is our update that now tells Georgia what we're going to do. So there are a lot of taxpayers out there, a lot of CPAs that are wondering, and especially about the accelerated depreciation. What are the limits? And I'm pleased to say we're going back to the $250,000 limits. And in fact, if you look on page 2, that's the heart of the bill. Everywhere else, it's the date changes. You'll see. But the lines 30, 34, there are the limits that we're talking about. Also on 35, there's an issue there with this. It has to do with some of the FAA and the pensions. We're adopting what the feds did. It gives some of the folks that had a pension in the FAA, I think due to some of those losses, ability to go back and amend returns. But that's it. It's very clean. It's probably one of the cleanest IRC update bills that we've had in a number of years. And again, I appreciate the chairman allowing us to go ahead and do this in anticipation of the fiscal note, because this is something we do desperately need to make sure that we put on a fast track to get through the Senate and back to the governor. Because I will reiterate, all of your tax preparers are out there and they're waiting for this, because guess what? All the software companies and the tax software companies are waiting for code to make sure that they can get the correct law in there to base the 2014 14 tax returns done on. So this is a very, very high importance. Any questions, Mr. Chair? I'll be happy to take them.
All right. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. As soon as we get the fiscal note, and it may be on Tuesday, we may call a brief meeting in the anteroom to go ahead and pass this out of committee. So be prepared for that announcement. Thank you, Chairman Knight. Chairman Battles, tell us about 202.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to be lengthy as I was in committee and subcommittee. 202 last year was 295. The year before that, I can't even remember what it was, 295. This has been in Ways and Means. This is the third year. It has gone through more changes than I have socks. And what it's done has been good because it's helped perfect this bill. And there's a lot of groups from our county commissioners all the way down to our clerks of Superior Court that have had issues about this. This passed out of Ways and Means last year. It went to rules, and in rules, Representative Hamilton offered an amendment that added some compensation to clerks of Superior Court for handling the appeal process of the ad valorem tax. When that was added, it passed the House, no problem, went over, and when I presented this in the Senate, they refused to accept that amendment. They struck that out, and we came back on day 40 without any resolution or compromise to that, and so naturally it died last year. Coming back this year and reintroducing this after much work by probably 80% of the people that are left in this room, and including God, because I sure have prayed about this for the last 3 years. And but what this simply does is that through all of this hard work, it's really brought about the revision of the regulations that deal with ad valorem taxation. It talks about the assessment process and the training that those assessors must have, the appeal process, and also those the Board of Tax Equalization and the training that they must have. In addition to that, the appraisers that would be involved in the process and the training that they must have. All of those have been dealt with of any of those from tax commissioners to the clerks and all others that have worked from the ACCG have come to an agreement that seems to be palatable for both the House and the Senate, because we've worked both sides of the building to get a bill that they will both agree on. And what we have is taking care of that issue that was in the bill that was removed by the Senate. We have in there language that concerns the clerks of Superior Court, and simply what that does is it breaks out that person who is going to be the appeal administrator and will be a separate line item in the county budget. It does not remove that person from the clerk's office. What it does is they remain in the clerk's office, but the amount of money that it takes to run the appeal process will be separated out from the clerk of Superior Court's budget. That is the only thing that has been changed, other than just some minor things, some very minor things that have been done over the years. So this is a great bill. I look across this room, and there's been those who have worked that we've sat in meetings and between sessions and talked about this and worked on this. So it's more work of those that are out here than it has been for me. I want to let them know I appreciate it. But, Mr. Chairman, unless there are questions, I would ask that you would consider passing this on to rules.
Are there questions? I think that anybody that is aware of the evolution of this bill knows that it has been tweaked, fine-tuned, modified, and that Chairman Battles has been with it every step of the way. And I think it's time that we gave him some relief, so I will entertain a motion. All right, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It is passed to rules.
Thanks to all of you and God.
That's the last thing I have on my agenda unless somebody's got something that I missed. If there is none, we are adjourned.